Hey, on today's episode of Finding Freedom, I'm going to be talking with Shaka Mitchell, and we'll be discussing school choice, civil rights, and how education reform shapes freedom and opportunity. Let's get into it.
We are born free, and we will die free. The time in between, though, that's complicated. In that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Finding Freedom here on the Lions of Liberty Network. Great to have you here today. I'm going to introduce my guest in just a moment, but before I do that, I want to remind you of my favorite coffee, Fox & Sons Coffee. If you haven't picked yourself up a bag yet today of these delicious, delicious coffee beans, please do so. You can go to foxandsons.com. That's FOXNSONS.com and enter code JOHN, JOHN, for 15% off an order of $40 or more. Don't miss out. Support a like-minded entrepreneur and a good guy, Stephen Fox, with Fox & Sons Coffee. All right, let's get into introducing my guest for today. My guest is Shaka Mitchell. He is a senior fellow at the American Federation for Children. He's a TEDx Nashville speaker, a past chair of the Tennessee Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. He advocates for school choice, education reform as vital tools for expanding opportunity and to strengthen communities. Shaka, welcome to Finding Freedom.
Hey, John, thanks for having me on. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. It's been a minute since we've had a show talking about school choice, talking about education, as well as how that all comes together and folds together with impacting civil rights. So I'm excited to dig into this conversation, Shaka. For people listening today who maybe don't know who you are, don't know, what you're passionate about and how you got involved in this very important field, maybe if you could kind of share a little bit about your background and what brings you here today.
Yeah, happy to do that. And, again, thanks for having me on. I'll try to keep it brief, but as you mentioned, I'm a senior fellow at the American Federation for Children, AFC. AFC is a national nonprofit organization, and we work to make sure that every child in the country has meaningful access to an education that best meets their needs. And I know there's a lot of folks around the country that work on education, but something that really drives our work is that we think that parents are the people who are best placed to make that decision, make that determination about what education meets a child's needs. And it's something I care deeply about. I've got 3 daughters myself, and I really am of the belief that there is still no sure way to realize your own version of the American dream without education. I think that is the education is really kind of a bedrock, good for civil society. And so we work every day to pass laws that give families the ability to take public dollars and use them in whatever setting makes sense for them. So that might be a public school. And if that's a public school for you or for your kids, fantastic, happy for you, glad for it. But we know that for a lot of kids, the zoned public school option is just not a great fit. And so we want to make sure that families have options, especially lower income families that live in neighborhoods where, they just need more choices. So that's kind of what we're about. We want to get those laws passed. We want to tell families about them. And, one of the ways to do that as well is to make sure that we're telling families which elected officials and which candidates support this as a value and support education choice or education freedom as one of their sort of core tenets. And so we tell parents and voters about that too.
So in your experience and I think, the conversation on school choice has evolved over time, right? But do you think it's become more of a bipartisan issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, school choice to me is not an inherently partisan issue.
Mm-hmm.
The first school choice program started in Milwaukee, 1991. A lot of people don't know that. It was actually kind of this fusion between a Republican governor, Tommy Thompson, and an African American Democrat representative, Polly Williams, and they came together and said, "Hey, we both think that this is important." Maybe they had some different, motivating factors behind them. Polly, to her credit, was looking around and saying, "There are kids in my district that need better schools," and the district schools don't seem interested in giving them any options or any higher quality options. I think Tommy Thompson believed that. Also, he was probably coming from more of a Milton Friedman kind of market-based, ideology as well. Said, "Hey, competition really helps improve quality." And listen, in some ways, I don't care what you call it, just get it done. And
Mm-hmm.
that was a bipartisan program. In many states, it continues to be a bipartisan effort. I would say it tends to be supported more by Republicans, but that hasn't always been the case.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think people do get kind of on both sides get heated about school choice,
Yeah.
and what it boils down to, like you've been talking about, it's giving education opportunities to everyone, and being able to really take those dollars and travel with them. If the school, where the your children live is not providing an educational opportunity that's going to give them the chance to really advance and go to college if they want to, or whatever, then like you said, we got to make it happen. We
Yep.
got to find out a way to navigate that. So like what kind of challenges are families facing right now with this with the current education system? And I know it's very different from state to state, right? Like I'm in Pennsylvania, and I know within Pennsylvania, I think for the most part, schools in Pennsylvania have a reputation of being pretty solid. That's obviously not all schools, but and I think one of the reasons for that is because um, our schools are not managed at the county level. It's zeroed in down to the township or the municipality or the borough. So those dollars that come in are closer to the actual students and teachers. And a lot of states, I know Ohio, Georgia, Maryland. I'm not familiar with Tennessee, but I know a lot of states, it's zoomed out at the county level. All your schools,
Yep.
all those dollars come up and then are pushed back down to the individual schools. So is that, I guess this is a meandering question, but what's your viewpoint on that dynamic? And
Yeah.
how does that play into someone in your position who's looking for the best fit and how to utilize school choice?
Yeah. Great question. And that's a lot of good context that you've already given. So, one of the things for folks to know is that education mostly happens at the local and state level, right? So with education, when we're talking about K-12 education.
Mm-hmm.
So the federal Department of Education gets a lot of press, but those dollars really only account for about 10 or 11% of all education funding, in K-12. The action's really at the local and state level. But just like you're already indicating, even within a state, results can vary widely. So I was just with some lawmakers from the Philadelphia area.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you what, there are some pockets of Philadelphia where you absolutely would not want to send your students to school, despite the fact that Philadelphia is spending over $22,000 per pupil. And so this is an issue that we see around the country. It's not just an inner city issue. It's very often a rural issue where you see increasing dollars being spent per pupil on public education in the public schools, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
But you're seeing declining academic results. And so you're right that things differ from state to state, but actually some national data just came out on September 9th So, maybe a little more than a month ago, by the time this airs, the National Assessment of Educational Progress came out. Sometimes it's called the nation's report card. It's one of the only national assessments that we've got. And the results were dire. We got 12th grade results in reading and math, and it showed that only about 1 in 3 12th graders reads on grade level. 1 in 3. And graduation rates are up above 85%. So we've got to ask the question, well, if we're graduating on these kids, but they're not on grade level, like what are they really going to be prepared for? At the same time, this isn't just about being ready for college. It's about being ready for career, for the workforce, for military service. The military right now has got, it's close to all-time lows in recruitment. Part of that is because 25% of new recruits have to take remedial work. They're not academically ready to even start boot camp. That, to me, is a civic problem. It might be a national security problem eventually. So, that's kind of how I think about the current state of play in education around the country.
Yeah. So, like you were talking earlier about with school choice, giving parents an opportunity to take their dollars elsewhere. Um, what does that look like practically? I mean, what kinds of schools? And I'm sure this is wide ranging, but we're talking private schools, charter schools, going to a differing public school? I guess I'm asking, like from a planning standpoint, how does this actually work? Because if you have a school in an area, you could be a city, it could be a rural area
Yep.
where they're expecting to get a certain amount of students, right? And then, school choice comes in and you have vouchers or however it's implemented, and they're able to go elsewhere. How are the schools able to dynamically plan to be able to adjust to, give those students an education?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a fair question. So I'll give you an example of the state that's got what I would say is the most mature school choice environment. That's Florida. So in Florida, you've got, I think, about 3 million students total. 500,000 students participate in a private choice program, meaning they are getting money from the state and they're going to a non-public school or they're doing homeschool. Another 400,000 participate in charter schools. So those are public schools, but they're operated usually by an independent nonprofit. So you've got close to 1 million kids now in Florida who are choosing something that's not their zoned public school. So how does it work? One of the things that I would point to in terms of how it works is to look at Miami-Dade County. Miami, obviously one of the biggest cities in the country. In that county, something like 70% of the students attend a school that's not their zoned school. Now, many of them attend another public school, whether it's a magnet or some kind of specialized school. They're doing what's called open enrollment, where you can opt into another school. But what it means practically for families is that they've got this menu of options, right? So you move to Miami. If you were to move from Pennsylvania to Miami, you would just know, and your realtor would tell you, hey, when you come here, if you don't like the school that's right down the street, that's cool, because you've got some other options. You could do a micro school and receive funds and do that so that you're not having to come out of pocket for that. You could go to a private school. You could go to a charter. Maybe there's some specialized STEM school that's part of the district. Who knows? So you've got this menu of options to choose. In terms of what happens to the public schools, when public schools are operating well, as I would say that they generally are in a place like Miami-Dade, what you see is the public schools themselves start to think of themselves as schools of choice, not schools of last resort. And that's what I think you want. You want every public school principal, every public school superintendent to say, hey, we're running a great school system. Parents, we want you to choose us. We don't think that you owe us your children. the school districts that think that they are owed children, those are the ones that struggle because they don't adapt, they don't improve at a rate that, justifies their existence. And this is going to sound maybe cold-hearted, but if you're not operating in a manner that attracts families, why in the world would we want to keep funding that? And so eventually those are the schools that really struggle. But where things work well, you've got dynamic leaders who kind of see this happening and they say, all right, we've got to compete so that we are a school of choice as well.
I mean, that makes, sure to my audience, that makes perfect sense. It's the free market at work, at least a version of the free market,
Yep.
a little bit of government involvement, but promoting a free market model, I guess is a way to put it. But so who, or maybe not who, but what are the different forces at play that are the biggest resistance to why we don't have more of a Florida model throughout our other states?
Yeah. Well, when you're thinking about who opposes choice, I think you've got to ask the question as well, who currently profits from the status quo system? And where you have these basically government monopolies, right? You've got systems where, again, a city like Baltimore is a great example. The amount of money spent per pupil in Baltimore is just astronomical. I think it's up above $25,000 per pupil, which, that's private school tuition. That's a crazy amount of money.
Well, like for comparison's sakes, what would be like a comparison of a public school of a state that's doing it, efficiently? Like price per pupil.
So where I live, we spend closer to between $13,000 and $15,000 in Nashville.
Wow, that's a big difference.
That's a big difference. If you ask families, and here's really where I think the rubber meets the road. If you ask Baltimore families, and many of them are sending their kids to schools that have zero kids who are proficient on, in math and reading, zero children. I'm not talking percentages, but no kids in the building in some of the Baltimore high schools who have been proficient. Okay.
Wow.
If you said to that family, hey, guess what it costs for us to not educate your child? $22,000 per year. Like that's just crazy.
Essentially, it's just babysitting, or if you're not,
it is. That's right. And so I think we've got to ask the question: who benefits from maintaining a system like that? I would say you've got these bloated district offices, central offices. So if you were to look at charts of the amount of funding, inflation adjusted, that funding over time in the public school system over the last 25, 30 years, the funding continues to go up. Meanwhile, the number of students has remained basically flat. It's actually decreasing a little bit. The number of teachers is essentially flat. What else is going up though? Administrators. Right? And so you've got this like middle management tier that continues to get bloated. I would also say a lot of school districts spend an inordinate amount of money on capital expenses, capital costs, and they don't spend it wisely. And this is what's the Milton Friedman kind of quote, like you never spend someone else's money as carefully as you spend your own money. That is absolutely true when it comes to how districts do capital, expenditures. So I can tell you from my experience, having been an administrator at a charter school where we had to go out and knock on doors and try to, convince families that, hey, we're starting this new school. We think it's going to be great. We think it's going to work for your student. Will you trust us with that? Right? There's very much hand-to-hand outreach to families.
Yeah.
We had to raise some private money to help fund our building. We did we built new buildings for less than $8 million for a building with 500 or so elementary school students. Beautiful new building. Really proud of that. Same city, our school district renovated a high school and it cost $80 million. and took years. Like, what are we doing? Right
Yeah.
now, I don't know what was inside the guts of that building, but I suspect you could have just bulldozed a thing, built a new one. $80 million is a lot of money.
Sure is.
And I just think that districts are not careful with it because they don't have to be, because they feel that many of them feel that they are owed our students.
Yeah, and they feel like they can always turn around and raise property taxes in order to raise more money.
That's right. There's a sort of entitlement, mentality to it, right? Like, we're entitled to exist. And I would say it's just the wrong frame. I mean, every state has an education provision in its state constitution, and I think that's important. But it doesn't mean that 100% of the schools need to be operated by the government.
Mm-hmm. So continuing with the example in Baltimore, I mean, really, kind of what you're describing to me, it's like the corporatization of the school system with all this middle management and people pushing paper around essentially that are taking a big salary, and then you don't have. I think essentially what you don't have anyone in there who knows how to manage a project like building a new school. They're not looking at the risk first reward, like you said. They're just entitled to it. So you can ask questions like how did it come to this? How did we get in that in this situation? But we're here now. So it's
Right.
really asking, for me, the important questions are, how do you change it? How do you influence the people who have who will run for office to make these changes, to flip the model upside down,
Yeah.
to come in there and actually shake things up?
Yeah, I think one of the ways to do it, and I'm sure there's not one right way to do it, right? Otherwise, we'd be doing that, and it would have been we'd have choice in 50 states. But I will say, there's a ton of momentum in recent years, and so in the past 5 years, the number of states that have passed new choice programs is just amazing, and most of these are what we call universal programs. So they are universally open and available to students, like regardless of income, regardless of where in the state they're coming from. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is some data that comes from Florida that shows some of the benefits of a little of what we were talking about a minute ago, these competitive effects. So
Mhm.
some researchers looked at not just how the kids were doing who participated in the choice program, who took an education savings account, an ESA, and went to a private school or Catholic school or micro or homeschool, whatever. We know that those students have better high school and college graduation rates. That's been documented. These researchers looked at, well, how do the students do who remain in the public school system even after these programs have been enacted? That's a pretty interesting question, I think.
Yeah.
What they found is that those students actually do better academically and have better college through rates and college attendance rates because of the competitive effects. So higher graduation rates, greater college attendance, lower crime rates among or as compared to students who remain in the public school system but didn't have as much exposure to choice. So that's pretty interesting. It's something that I like to share with lawmakers who are maybe on the fence a little bit, because I think the wrong way to think about these programs is to think that it's a zero-sum kind of program. There's not some fixed number of smart kids, right?
Mhm.
There's some fixed number of kids who can succeed in college, career, and in the workforce. That number's not fixed. We have no idea how high that ceiling is.
Yeah.
Right. So what this shows is the students who participate, they do better. And by the way, this rising tide, it's going to lift all boats, so that outcomes are better even for the ones who remain in the public school system. That has been really powerful in Florida. And, I think that if we're able to do that research in other places, I think the research will hold in other states too.
So in addition to that right there, I think that is definitely a misunderstood aspect. It's not zero sum. I mean, improving education in any degree, across the board, is going to have a huge impact
Yeah.
on the future of this country, on the future of humanity. Really, I think it's really that important. I mean, we're talking about the children are the future. It's cliche to say, but it's true. But other than that, like, what are the other misunderstandings you think people have about school choice that when they hear the word that they kind of like maybe they'll cringe or take a step back?
Yeah. I think that a lot of folks get nervous about funding. They say, "Oh, but what happens when um, dollars leave the public school system?" And what I like to remind them is that uh, this happens every day. The way that it happens is what I would call like the second form of school choice. The first form of school choice is when parents just come out of pocket and they pay for some other option, right? And
Hmm.
that's existed for um, hundreds of years. The second form of school choice that I think, again, happens every day, certainly every season, is when people move. And you see it all the time with young families in particular, right? They may live in an area and they really like the area, then they start a family and realize after asking some questions, hey, how are the schools around here? And they find out, oh, the schools are not great. What do they do? The ones that have means move. They move somewhere else. They move to a district that's got better schools. Um, that is a form of school choice, right? That is just doing school choice by real estate. And every time that happens, that family, by moving their student, is taking dollars with them. We don't restrict people's right to move when they're doing one of the most natural things that you can, which is to do the best you can for your children.
Right.
Um, so I think that that's often a misconception that this is, you know, moving dollars around in some way that is new and novel. But those dollars move all the time because ultimately we should be more concerned with the outcomes for students, for children, than we are whether or not this failing brick and mortar building continues to receive funds.
Right. It seems like no matter what I talk about on this show, AI always enters its way into the conversation in some capacity. But I want to ask, what you think, how you feel about the future of education. But you can't talk about the future, can't talk about the present without talking about AI, without talking about how it's going to impact education, how we learn, how our children learn. So how do you feel about where we're tracking? And just like I guess some more like background on where this question is coming from. Like I know, for example, I have a daughter who she's in fourth grade right now. Um, they do s- a certain percentage of their learning on the computer. Still doing handwritten stuff. I contrast that with I have a nephew who's down in the down in Maryland, outside of Baltimore, and their math classes are essentially there's a teacher there, but it's really just like an aide, and they're just doing their math on their computer.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess where this question's coming from, when we look forward to the future and how we educate, yes, children need to learn how to utilize AI, how to learn to prompt and things of that nature, and use it for coding and all these different things. But how do you feel about the future and how this new technology should be involved in making learning more efficient? And super complicated question now that I'm
Yeah.
starting to phrase it, but and how teachers factor into that. But
Yeah.
is this
Yeah.
something that you've given thought to?
Well, I've probably given it more thought, like you, as a parent than I
Hmm.
have as an advocate. I mean, we don't take a position on the use of AI in schools and so forth. But like you, I'm a parent. I've got three daughters, and we're also trying to figure out like what's the right role for technology just in their lives and our lives in general. I say that appreciating that you and I are doing this interview, you know, 1,000 miles apart on with technology that
Right.
we couldn't have done this even 5 years ago, right? So, yeah, technology is a really amazing thing. One of the things, and I do think it relates a little bit to school choice. One of the things that AI is not going to be able to do for us is it's not going to be able to tell us what constitutes a good life. It's not going to be able to tell us, these tools are not going to be able to tell us um, what gives us purpose,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those are things that I believe only happen through interaction with other people. I think it requires each of us as individuals asking, questions and being curious, being open to hearing the experiences of other folks and then kind of internalizing those. So I don't think that we need to worry about being replaced by the robots per se. I think that there are always going to be things that we need to learn and that we frankly learn in community with one another.
Mm-hmm.
So here's how I think it relates to school choice. I think that the schools that are going to thrive in this new technological environment are going to be the ones who know what their mission is. If you're a school that knows what its mission is, then you can say, all right, how do we remain the human in the loop? Right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we remain the driver and the user of this tool, not the other way around? And the schools that don't have a clearly articulated mission, that don't have a vision and know where they're going, those are the ones that I think they need to be worried about the technological tail wagging the dog.
Yes.
And so that's where I think, unfortunately, many public school districts and public schools may run into some trouble because, again, if you don't know what you're about, if you don't have an ethos that drives your work every day, then you're subject to just kind of chasing these, kind of whatever the next tech trend is. And you do that and you do that for 3 years and you realize, oh, turns out that wasn't really benefiting our kids or we didn't execute it well, we didn't implement it well. Now we're going to chase this other thing. And that's such an uneven experience. I don't think it benefits anybody. So I think it's really going to be the schools that have a clear mission. And so I would encourage families when you're looking for schools, ask questions like what you're talking about, John. Ask a school, hey, what's your philosophy on how to incorporate this technology? And if you don't get an answer that's satisfying, maybe it's because they haven't thought about it a whole lot. And if they haven't thought about it a whole lot, I would say, turn around and go somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. It's a question that has to be answered, and I mean, we talking about parenting, us both being parents. I mean, there's parents who are totally comfortable just giving their kid an iPad and letting them sit for you know,
Right.
whatever amount of time or at a restaurant in order to distract them, and we don't want to make that the same thing that's happening with our kids when they're being educated. So I think it's maybe one of the most important conversations of our time that we need to have. But kind of with that in mind and looking ahead, but also keeping in mind these big wins that school choice has had over the past few years. What gives you hope right now for the future of education?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question. Something that's given me a lot of hope recently. Well, let me zoom out.
Yeah.
I mean, we're coming out of a time, COVID, that was pretty hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that for a lot of families, a lot of families, lost family members and loved ones, and so that's tragic in and of itself. Educationally, it was a devastating time for many families, whether it's because your kids were at home, other things going on health wise. So it was a tough time. A silver lining was that a lot of families said, okay, we've got to be engaged in a new way. And I think families around the country engaged in education with this new energy. And so you saw laws pass everywhere from, Arizona to Tennessee, Arkansas, Idaho. I mean, all over the place. Um, that's really exciting to me because I think that you want to have partnerships between parents and the educators, regardless of the school setting, right? I think that there should be strong partnerships there. That's what benefits kids. So that's encouraging. The next thing that's really encouraging is that for the first time ever, a federal tax credit program passed at the K-12 level. And I say this knowing you a little bit, knowing your audience a little bit.
Mhm.
Usually we don't say, "Yay, there's a new federal law." So I'm sensitive to that. This is different because this was not a new federal Department of Education program. This actually came as part of the tax code. And what this is this allows for a dollar for dollar tax credit, federal tax credit, when instead of sending your tax liability to the IRS, you can now direct it to an in-state scholarship granting organization. Right? So if you've got just, I'm going to use round numbers so that I don't get too confused here. If you've got $5,000 in tax liability, federal tax liability,
Mhm.
instead of, cutting that check, $5,000 to the U.S. Treasury, you can direct up to $1,700 per taxpayer to a scholarship granting organization. That has never happened before.
Oh, wow.
And so, if you're like me, that's kind of two birds with one stone because you are now actually sending less money to the government and you are adding, you're pooling your resources with other people from around the country, around your state to provide scholarships for kids. And then those scholarships can go out and they can be used for a whole range of education purposes. So that's pretty cool. Estimates say that this is probably in the first year going to raise somewhere between $4 and $20 billion to go out in scholarships. So that's
Crazy.
pretty exciting. And that just passed this summer. That goes into effect in 2027.
Where's the best place to learn more about that? How to utilize that?
Yeah, we can. I can send you a link. Our website, federationforchildren.org, Federation for FOR children.org, has a site where you can read the language of the bill itself. And it was very short. It's a page and a half. But you can also read our summary of it and learn more about that. But we're pretty pumped about that. I think, that's basically going to open up school choice to almost every child in the country. Now, here's the disclaimer.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the federal government, it's never going to be 100% great. The disclaimer is that governors have to opt into the program. So there's some question. Are governors going to do that? I am hopeful that governors, regardless of party, are going to participate. Because if they don't, so, your state, John, you've got a Democratic governor. I've got a Republican governor. My governor has already said that he's going to participate, that we're going to participate. Your governor has not made any indication yet. But here's the thing. If regardless of whether or not your governor, Shapiro, participates, you as a taxpayer can put money into a scholarship organization. So the real question for the governor is, do you want John to put his tax money into a Pennsylvania scholarship organization?
Right.
Or a scholarship organization in another state? And I cannot imagine that governors are going to say, oh, sure, just send all your tax money to kids in some other state. That's crazy to me.
That would be crazy. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. And that's to be a huge political liability for them.
That's what I think. That's what I think.
Yeah.
But I don't, far be it from me to understand how politicians make their decisions sometimes, but anyway, it's really exciting to me because this means scholarships could go to kids. And by the way, that's kids in private school, charters, public, homeschool in many states. So super exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. Shaka, just one more question for you here. We're almost out of time, but I want to make sure to give you a chance to give plugs for everything. And I don't know if you want to give social media plugs too, but how people can find everything you're working on and follow you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And it's been a great conversation. Folks can go online. I mentioned Federation for Children. If you want to learn more about what the American Federation for Children is up to, you can learn more about school choice programs in your state. And if folks are so inclined, most of my writing and my own podcast, which is called Quality Matters, where we investigate, just how we define and articulate measurements of quality in education. All that can be found on my Substack, which is Shaka's Substack. Pretty original.
Awesome. I like it. Well, Shaka Mitchell, thank you for coming on Finding Freedom.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right. All right, guys. That was a great interview. Hopefully you enjoyed it with Shaka Mitchell. Something that we haven't talked about in a little bit here, school choice, but super important topic. And if you're a parent like me, I'm sure that you have stories too that you could have shared and talked about, just like Shaka and I discussed today with the advent of technology and how schools are dealing with that and the variations between public schooling in different states and even, different areas in states, rural communities versus cities versus suburbs. So super important conversation. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Please share it with a friend. This would be a great episode this would be a great episode for you to share for maybe that you normally wouldn't share with someone, but definitely could be something that people are interested in. So think about doing that. Appreciate you listening. As always, subscribe either in audio format on Apple or Spotify, or if you like YouTube or Rumble, please subscribe there. So with that being said, I will see everyone next week with another great interview. In the meantime, always remember to keep your head up and those fires of liberty burning.